Alright, so for this video, let's continue in our discussion of the engagement partner's responsibilities as it relates to supervising the audit to make sure that the audit is performed with quality. And for this particular video, we're going to be discussing the engagement quality control review. And this is in AUC sections 220.21 and 22. So first, before we jump into this, let's gain an understanding of what an engagement quality control review is. Okay, so here we're in the definitions section, and we have a few definitions here. The engagement quality control review and the engagement quality control reviewer. So the engagement quality control review is a process designed to provide an objective evaluation before the report is released of the significant judgments the engagement team made and the conclusions it reached in formulating the auditor's report. And the engagement quality control review process is only for those audit engagements, if any, for which the firm has determined that an engagement quality control review is required in accordance with its policies and procedures. And the person who performs this review is a partner, other person in the firm, suitably qualified external person, or a team made up of such individuals, none of whom is part of the engagement team, with sufficient and appropriate experience and authority to objectively evaluate the significant judgments that the engagement team made and the conclusions it reached in formulating the auditor's report. So let's say we're performing an audit of an entity that has some pretty complex accounting situations or policies, or maybe we had some threats to independence that we wanted to reduce to a reasonable level, or maybe the auditing standards require that we get a quality control review for that particular engagement. For instance, maybe in accordance with government auditing standards or the PCAOB SEC standards. So in that case, we would have someone outside of the engagement team, engagement quality control reviewer, and that could be someone in the firm, like another partner, or it could be another accounting firm, and we would maybe pay them to review the engagement that we performed to make sure that we did all of the procedures appropriately and reduced the audit risk to an appropriate level that supports our opinion. And so whether or not we have a quality control review is dependent on the firm's policies and procedures for when that quality control should be reviewed or should be performed. So let's go back to the section on the requirements for performing a quality control review, now that we have an understanding of what one is. Okay, so now we're back down in the AUC section 220.21 and 22, which discuss the engagement quality control review. And this 21 discusses the engagement partner's responsibilities as it relates to the quality control review. And this 22 discusses the quality control reviewer's responsibilities as it relates to the quality control review. So let's take on the engagement partner's responsibilities first. And it says that if during our audit engagement, the firm has determined that a quality control review is required, then the engagement partner on that engagement should determine that an engagement quality control reviewer has been appointed. And that he should also discuss significant findings or issues arising during the audit engagement, including those identified during the engagement quality control review, with the engagement quality control reviewer. And he should not release the auditor's report until the completion of the engagement quality control review. So we see here the steps in having the quality control review performed. First, he needs to appoint the quality control reviewer, and then discuss any significant findings or issues found in the quality control review with the quality control reviewer. And then he should also not release his report, his opinion, until that quality control review is finished. And so we've got some explanatory material right here that will give us a little more information on how this works. So let's go down to AUC sections 220.A23 through A25. All right, so now we're down to explanatory material, sections A23 through A25, and this discusses how we are supposed to finish the quality control review before we release the auditor report. And in order to do that, it suggests that the engagement quality control review could be done throughout appropriate stages during the audit. That way, all the significant findings or issues are found on a timely basis and can be resolved to the reviewer's satisfaction before the release date, the report release date, without much delay. And so completion of the engagement quality control review means that the quality control reviewer has performed all of his responsibilities, and we'll discuss those responsibilities next. But it also says that documentation of the engagement quality control review can be performed after the release date, but it has to be documented before the final audit file is compiled and archived. And that requirement is that it's done within 60 days after the audit report release date, and that is described in section 230. But we see here that the engagement quality control review needs to be completed by the report release date, but we don't necessarily have to document the quality control review before the release date. We can document it up to 60 days after the report is issued. And it goes on to say that if the quality control review is completed after the auditor's report is dated, but in that quality control review there were additional procedures that the quality control reviewer required, then we need to change the date on the audit report to match the date when the additional procedures were completed or that additional evidence was obtained. So we're not able to date the auditor's report before we have completely finished the engagement quality control review, and that includes performing additional procedures or obtaining additional evidence that the quality control reviewer required of us. And so that's described more in AUC section 700. So now we understand sort of the requirements of the firm and the engagement partner as it relates to his role in the engagement quality control review and the requirements for the timing and report release date required in relation to the quality control review. Let's go back up to AUC section 220.22 and understand what are exactly the engagement quality control reviewer's responsibilities as it relates to the review. Okay, so now we're back up into the requirements section as it relates to engagement quality control reviews, and down in AUC section 220.22, it describes the responsibilities of the engagement quality control reviewer. And it says that this reviewer needs to perform an objective evaluation of the significant judgments made by the engagement team and the conclusions reached in formulating their auditor's report, and that his review should involve discussion of significant findings or issues with the engagement partner, reading the financial statements and the proposed auditor's report, a review of selected audit documentation relating to the significant judgments the engagement team made and the related conclusions reached, and the evaluation of the conclusions reached in formulating the auditor's report, and consideration of whether the proposed audit report is appropriate. And so this is the cycle of the review that the quality control reviewer is performing. If during his review he finds some significant findings or issues, he needs to discuss those with the engagement partner. He also needs to read the financial statements and the auditor's report and make sure that they're appropriate. And he also needs to read or review some of the audit documentation, especially for the significant judgments that the engagement team made, and determine if those are appropriate. And then based on all of these steps, he should conclude on whether the auditor's report is appropriate. And so down in A26 and A31, we have some more specific information for what the engagement quality control reviewer should do. So let's go down to that section. Okay, so now down in the explanatory material about the nature, timing, and extent of engagement quality control review. So these are the reviewer's responsibilities when he's performing this quality control review. It first makes note that in some cases, we may start the engagement and we don't think that it needs a quality control review based on our understanding of the engagement. But then later on, as we're working on the engagement, we may realize that it does require quality control review. And so at that point, we may need to bring in a quality control reviewer. And so we should be alert to those types of changes in circumstances. And so a quality control review isn't necessarily a set in stone list of procedures that need to be done. There's a lot of subjective judgments that should be made on exactly what should be the tasks done by the quality control reviewer, depending on the complexity of the audit engagement and the risk that our audit report might not be appropriate. But that said, the engagement partner can't use the quality control review as a scapegoat for him to neglect his responsibilities for the engagement. So he needs to still perform his responsibilities that we've seen in other sections within this AUC section 220 and not solely rely on the quality control review to make sure that the engagement was performed appropriately. And so we saw up in the requirements that the engagement quality control reviewer is supposed to evaluate significant judgments made by the engagement team. So how might he do that? Here we have a few bullet points of different things that the reviewer should consider. For one, he should consider the significant risk identified during the engagement as required by AUC section 315. He should also evaluate the responses to those risks, and as we're required to do in AUC section 330. And he should also assess and determine the response we made to the risk of fraud in accordance with AUC section 240. So in performing his review, he needs to find out, did we identify appropriate risks, and then did we respond to them appropriately, and including those related to fraud. And also, did we make appropriate judgments when we developed our materiality and determined which of our risks are significant? Did we appropriately dispose of and correct, or rather, when we found misstatements in our procedures, whether they were corrected or uncorrected, did we appropriately identify them and dispose of them during our audit? And also, he should see, did we communicate with management and those charged with governance, as well as maybe regulatory bodies, in accordance with GAS and when appropriate. We've also got some other things that the engagement quality control reviewer might look at. He might consider our independence with regard to the audit engagement. So were we independent, or did we apply appropriate safeguards to threats to independence? Did we appropriately perform and document our consultations with others involving differences of opinion or difficult or contentious matters and related conclusions arising during those consultations? We saw in a prior section, this AUC section 220, regarding the requirements for our consultations, but the quality control reviewer needs to look to see, did we execute those appropriately? And he also needs to review the audit documentation to make sure that it appropriately reflects the work that we did and supports the judgments and the conclusions that we reached. So our quality control reviewer has quite a few steps here to perform, and needs to use his professional judgment to make sure that we performed the engagement according to GAS as well as other standards setters requirements. And so typically a quality control reviewer might have a checklist that makes it easier for him to fulfill his role. And possibly a good one to use would be the same checklist that a peer reviewer might use during the audit, or rather in his performance of a peer review. And those checklists could also be used internally by the engagement partner and engagement team to make sure, as an internal quality control review. And those checklists are publicly available on the AICPA's website. So let's go there and just take a look so we can understand where those are if we need them at some point in the future, or if the quality control reviewer would like some sort of structure in his review. So if you go to a web browser and you go to this website right here, you can pause the video if you need to copy down this URL. But you can go here, and this includes peer review checklists for team and review captains. So if we click on team captain checklist web page, we'll be taken to the peer review checklist. If we scroll down, first, these checklists are for the peer reviewer to appropriately perform his peer review. But if we go down to these section numbers in the 20,000s, these are different engagement checklists. So these are checklists to make sure the engagement was performed appropriately. And we see that we have a compilation, preparation, review, general audit engagement checklist. So this might be the appropriate one for us to use. There are also very specific checklists related to other types of engagements that might be helpful. SEC broker-dealer audits, bank and savings institutions, so on and so forth, agreed upon procedures, employee benefit plan audits, audits of nonprofits. So if we click on the general audit engagement checklist, you can come down here and download this checklist. I have one downloaded, so let's pull this up and see. Here's the general audit checklist. Let's see. So this is the general audit engagement checklist. And as I said, this is for peer reviewers to use during peer review, but it could also be used for the quality control reviewer in his quality control review, or could be used internally for the engagement team to make sure that they performed and executed the engagement appropriately. So we can see here from the table of contents, there's a lot of different areas that we've already studied in these GAS videos, and then also areas that we will study eventually. For instance, audit planning, fraud considerations. There's also steps related to high audit risk areas that maybe the quality control reviewer could look into. And then there's also general audit procedures, for instance, management representation letters and analytical procedures. So anyway, the engagement team or the quality control reviewer could possibly use this as a reference for performing the quality control reviews.